In the bustling heart of New York City stood a grand mansion, a testament to the relentless ambition of Henry Walker. At 55, Henry was a titan of industry, his steel company, Walker Industries, dominating the market. His tall, imposing figure, marked by silver hair and a perpetually stern expression, commanded respect and fear alike. Inside his lavishly decorated office, adorned with industrial art and framed photographs of his early years, Henry meticulously reviewed quarterly reports. "Efficiency must increase," Henry muttered to himself, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. The ornate clock on the wall struck 6, but Henry's workday was far from over. He believed in discipline and hard work, values he desperately wanted to instill in his only son, Michael. Michael Walker, a 25-year-old with a gentle demeanor, was everything Henry was not. Raised amidst luxury, Michael had grown accustomed to a life of ease. He was attractive, with a natural charm that drew people to him, yet he lacked the steeliness of his father. Despite attending the finest schools and partaking in numerous leadership programs, Michael struggled to meet his father's exacting standards. "Good evening, Dad," Michael greeted as he entered the office, his tone respectful but weary. "Michael," Henry acknowledged without looking up. "Have you reviewed the latest project proposals?" "Yes, I have," Michael replied, handing over a neatly organized folder. "But there's something else I wanted to discuss." "Later," Henry cut him off. "We have pressing matters at hand." Michael sighed inwardly, used to his father's brusque dismissals. He retreated to his room, a spacious suite filled with the trappings of wealth. Behind a bookshelf, he kept his secret sanctuary, a small studio where he indulged his passion for painting. Tonight, he escaped there, hoping to find solace in his art. In a stark contrast to the Walker mansion, a modest apartment in Brooklyn was home to Sarah Miller. At 23, Sarah was the sole breadwinner for her family, working tirelessly as a cleaner. Her days were long, filled with scrubbing floors and polishing surfaces, but she faced each task with unwavering determination. Her strength stemmed from a deep love for her ailing mother and younger brother, whose well-being depended on her relentless efforts. One early morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the cityscape, Sarah arrived at the mansion for her cleaning shift. She moved silently through the opulent halls, her presence barely noticeable. Yet, her diligence did not go unnoticed by everyone. Michael, unable to sleep, wandered the mansion. He found Sarah meticulously cleaning a grand staircase, her focus and dedication palpable. He watched her for a moment, struck by the stark difference between her life and his. "Good morning," Michael greeted, surprising Sarah. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," Sarah replied, her voice polite but cautious. Encounters with the Walker family were rare and usually intimidating. "Please call me Michael," he said with a friendly smile. "You're always here so early." "There's a lot to be done before the day begins," Sarah explained, her eyes betraying her exhaustion. Michael nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for the privilege he had taken for granted. "I admire your dedication," he said sincerely. "Thank you," Sarah responded, a hint of warmth in her tone. "It's necessary." Henry Walker had always been an astute observer. Over the months, he had watched Sarah Miller work diligently in his mansion. She was meticulous, reliable, and above all, honest. Her integrity in every small task had not gone unnoticed by Henry. One morning, while sipping his coffee and gazing out of his office window, Henry overheard a conversation between two of his senior employees discussing loyalty and dedication. It struck a chord with him. He decided then and there that his son, Michael, needed a drastic lesson in humility and responsibility. lessons that could only be taught by someone who embodied these virtues. And he knew exactly who that person was. Later that evening, Henry called Michael into his office. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the antique lamp on Henry's mahogany desk. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Michael entered, curiosity mixed with a hint of apprehension in his eyes. "Michael, have a seat," Henry began, his tone unusually gentle yet firm. Michael sat down, sensing that this conversation was different from their usual business discussions. "What's this about, Dad?" he asked, trying to read his father's expression. Henry leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I've been thinking about your future, Michael. You need to learn what it means to be truly responsible, to understand the value of hard work and humility." Michael frowned, not quite understanding. "I thought I was doing well at the office," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "You are, but there's more to life than just business. You need grounding," Henry replied, "which is why I've decided you should marry Sarah." Michael's eyes widened in shock. "Marry Sarah, the cleaner?" Henry nodded. "Yes, Sarah. She embodies the qualities you lack. She's hardworking, honest, and responsible. Qualities you need to learn and appreciate." Michael's mind raced. The idea seemed ludicrous, but he knew better than to argue with his father. "But Dad, marriage isn't something you can just decide like a business deal." Henry's gaze hardened. "This isn't just about marriage, Michael. It's about shaping your character. If you respect my judgment, you'll understand why this is necessary." Seeing no way out, Michael reluctantly agreed, albeit with a heavy heart. "All right, Dad. If you believe this is what's best, I'll do it." The next day, Henry sought out Sarah. He found her in the library, meticulously dusting the shelves. She looked up, startled to see him. "Mr. Walker, can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice polite but wary. "Yes, Sarah. I have a proposition for you," Henry began, his tone serious. "I want you to marry my son, Michael." Sarah blinked, stunned. "Marry Michael? But why?" "Because I believe you can teach him the values he desperately needs. Your dedication and integrity are exactly what he lacks," Henry explained. He then added, "In return, I'll provide a substantial financial incentive, enough to cover your mother's medical expenses and your brother's education." Sarah's mind whirled. The offer was tempting, but the implications were daunting. "This is a lot to consider, Mr. Walker," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I understand," Henry said, his tone softening. "Take your time. But know this isn't just about my son. It's an opportunity for you and your family." That evening, Sarah sat at the small kitchen table in her modest apartment, her head in her hands. Her mother, frail but wise, sat across from her. "What's troubling you, Sarah?" her mother asked gently. Sarah sighed deeply. "Mr. Walker wants me to marry his son. He says it's to teach him humility and responsibility." Her mother's eyes widened in surprise. "And what do you think?" "I don't know, Mom. It's such a strange proposal. But it could change our lives, pay for your treatments, and ensure Tim's education," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with hope and fear. Her mother reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand. "Sometimes opportunities come in the most unexpected forms. You must decide if this is the right path for you." Sarah nodded, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. "I need to think about it." As she lay in bed that night, Sarah's mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions. The proposal was unconventional, even absurd, but the potential benefits for her family were undeniable. She decided she would meet with Henry the next day to discuss the terms further, knowing that whatever choice she made would alter the course of her life forever. The next morning, Sarah returned to the Walker mansion, her resolve firm. She found Henry in his office, waiting expectantly. "Mr. Walker, I've thought about your proposal," she began, taking a deep breath. "And I've decided to accept." Sarah sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, the weight of Henry Walker's proposal heavy on her mind. Her mother's hopeful eyes and her brother's innocent smile fueled her decision. The financial security Henry promised could transform their lives. She took a deep breath, dialing the number Henry had given her. "Mr. Walker, it's Sarah," she said when he answered. "I've decided to accept your proposal." "Excellent, Sarah," Henry replied, his voice firm and satisfied. "We will start preparations immediately." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. At the Walker mansion, elaborate wedding plans took shape. Michael, though still shocked by the arrangement, respected his father's decision and tried to make peace with it. He often found solace in his hidden studio, painting furiously to cope with the overwhelming changes. One evening, Michael approached his father. "Dad, is this really necessary? Marrying someone I barely know?" "Michael," Henry replied, his tone unwavering, "this is for your own good. Trust me, in time, you will understand." Meanwhile, Sarah faced a different kind of turmoil. Her neighbors and co-workers whispered behind her back, their judgmental glances adding to her anxiety. One afternoon, as she walked home, an old flame, David, intercepted her. "Sarah, I heard the news," David said, his voice laced with bitterness. "You're marrying into the Walker family?" Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "It's complicated, David. I'm doing it for my family." David scoffed. "And what about us? We had plans, dreams. Are you just going to throw that away?" "I'm sorry, David," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I have to think about my mother and brother. This is the best way to secure their future." David's eyes darkened with jealousy. "You'll regret this, Sarah. Mark my words." As the wedding day approached, the tension in the Walker mansion grew palpable. Sarah moved in temporarily to become familiar with her new life, feeling like an outsider in the opulent surroundings. The mansion staff watched her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, making her feel even more isolated. One morning, while Sarah was trying on her wedding dress, a soft knock on the door startled her. "Come in," she called. Michael entered, his expression conflicted. "Sarah, I just wanted to see how you're doing." "I'm managing," Sarah replied, offering a weak smile. "This is all so surreal." Michael nodded, stepping closer. "I know this isn't easy for you. It's not easy for me either. But I think we should try to make the best of it." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. "You're right. We should." The next day, as the wedding preparations continued, chaos erupted. The floral arrangements, which were supposed to be a simple yet elegant setup, arrived in disarray. The caterer called, cancelling at the last minute. It became clear that these disruptions were no accident. Henry called an emergency meeting in the study. "Someone is trying to sabotage this wedding," he said, his voice cold with anger. "We need to find out who." Suspicion fell on David, who had been seen near the mansion recently. Michael decided to confront him. "David," Michael said, finding him at a local bar, "I know you're behind this. Why?" David smirked, his jealousy evident. "Sarah deserves better than to be a pawn in your father's game." "Maybe she does," Michael admitted, surprising David. "But she made a choice. respect that." David's expression hardened. "If you care about her, you'll call off this sham of a wedding." Michael's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about me or my father. It's about Sarah and her family. Your interference only makes things harder for her." David seemed taken aback by Michael's sincerity. After a tense moment, he finally relented. "Fine, I'll back off." Back at the mansion, the chaos gradually settled. With the saboteur exposed and deterred, the preparations resumed smoothly. The night before the wedding, Sarah stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. Michael joined her, the cool breeze easing some of the tension. "Tomorrow, everything changes," Michael said softly. Sarah nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. "Yes, it does, but maybe change isn't so bad." Michael smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "We'll face it together then." The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the early morning sun casting a golden glow over the grand venue where the ceremony was to take place. The Walker mansion had been transformed into a floral wonderland, with intricate arrangements lining the pathways and adorning the entrance. Guests, dressed in their finest attire, began to arrive, their chatter a mix of admiration and speculative whispers. Sarah stood in a small, elegantly decorated room off the main hall, her heart pounding. Her mother fussed over her dress, a beautiful yet simple gown that contrasted starkly with the opulence around her. "You look stunning, Sarah," her mother said, her eyes welling with pride and emotion. "Thank you, Mom," Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. She glanced at herself in the mirror, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. Today, she was stepping into a world that was not her own, for the sake of her family. In another room, Michael adjusted his tie, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. His best man, his childhood friend Alex, clapped him on the back. "You ready for this, Michael?" Michael met his friend's gaze in the mirror. "Ready as I'll ever be," he said, forcing a smile. "It's just... this isn't how I imagined my wedding day." "I know," Alex replied, his voice gentle. "But sometimes life takes us on unexpected paths. Just remember why you're doing this." Michael nodded, taking a deep breath. As he left the room, he caught a glimpse of his father, Henry, giving last-minute instructions to the staff. Their eyes met, and Henry gave him a reassuring nod. The ceremony began with a soft melody played by a string quartet, setting a serene tone. Guests filled the seats, their eyes turning to the aisle as Sarah made her entrance. Michael stood at the altar, his breath catching as he saw her. For a moment, everything else faded away. She looked beautiful, her inner strength radiating outward. As she reached his side, he offered her a gentle smile, which she returned hesitantly. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice a calming presence. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Michael and Sarah. This union is a testament to the power of love and the bonds that hold us together." As the vows were exchanged, Sarah's voice trembled slightly but held firm. "I, Sarah, take you, Michael, to be my husband. I promise to support you, to honor you, and to stand by you through all that life may bring." Michael's eyes softened as he spoke his vows. "I, Michael, take you, Sarah, to be my wife. I promise to cherish you, to respect you, and to walk with you through whatever comes our way." The officiant cleared his throat and said, "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As their lips met in a brief, symbolic kiss, the reception that followed was a blur of congratulations and glad smiles. The grand facade of Michael's mansion loomed large as Sarah stood at the entrance, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The staff lined up to greet her, their expressions ranging from polite neutrality to thinly veiled skepticism. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside, ready to embrace her new life. "Welcome, Mrs. Walker," Mrs. Daniels, the head housekeeper, said with a stiff smile. "We've prepared the guest suite for you." "Thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. As Sarah settled into her new home, the initial days were a blur of unfamiliar faces and routines. The opulence of the mansion, with its high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and lavish decor, only added to her sense of displacement. One evening, as Sarah wandered through the mansion, she found herself in the library. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling a sense of calm amidst the chaos of her thoughts. Michael entered, his presence filling the room with an awkward tension. "How are you settling in?" Michael asked, trying to bridge the gap between them. "It's a lot to take in," Sarah admitted, turning to face him. "Everything here is so different from what I'm used to." "I can imagine," Michael said, his tone gentle. "If there's anything you need, just let me know." "Thank you," Sarah said, offering a small smile. "I'm still adjusting." As days turned into weeks, Michael and Sarah began to navigate their new reality. There were moments of friction as their different upbringings and expectations clashed. One morning, Sarah found Michael in the kitchen, frustratedly trying to make breakfast. "Do you need some help?" Sarah offered, stepping in to assist. "I thought I'd surprise you with breakfast," Michael admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly. "But I think I'm more of a hindrance than a help." Sarah laughed softly, the tension easing. "Let's do it together. I'll show you how it's done." Michael admired Sarah's patience and her ability to find joy in the simplest tasks. He began to see the world through her eyes, appreciating the small moments that he had often overlooked in his privileged life. One afternoon, while exploring the mansion, Sarah stumbled upon a hidden door in the east wing. Curious, she pushed it open and gasped at what she found. The room was filled with canvases, paints, and unfinished artworks. The light filtering through the tall windows cast a warm glow on the vibrant colors of Michael's secret passion. "Michael!" she called out, her voice echoing in the spacious room. Michael appeared at the doorway, a look of surprise on his face. "I see you found my studio," he said, a hint of embarrassment in his tone. "These are incredible," Sarah said, walking among the canvases. "Why do you keep this hidden?" Michael sighed, stepping into the room. "My father never approved. He always saw it as a distraction from my responsibilities." "But this is a part of who you are," Sarah said, her eyes meeting his. "You shouldn't have to hide it." Michael looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in his eyes. "It's not that simple, Sarah. My father has certain expectations." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Maybe it's time to show him that you can be both, a responsible son and a passionate artist." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "You're right. Maybe it's time to stop hiding." Over the following weeks, Sarah's humility and kindness continued to influence Michael. He began to open up more, sharing his thoughts and dreams with her. One evening they sat together in the garden, the twilight casting a serene glow over the landscape. "I never thought I'd say this," Michael began, his voice thoughtful. "But I'm glad you're here, Sarah. You've brought a perspective into my life that I desperately needed." Sarah smiled, her heart warming at his words. The days turned into weeks, and as Sarah and Michael began to settle into their new life, the undercurrents of tension started to surface. Michael faced increasing pressure from his business associates, many of whom openly mocked his marriage. "Michael, why tie yourself to someone so common?" one associate sneered during a board meeting. "You could have any woman in the city." Michael's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "My personal life is not up for discussion in this boardroom. Let's focus on the numbers." Despite his calm exterior, the constant jabs took their toll. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own battles. At social gatherings, she was often the target of subtle hostility and snide remarks. "How quaint," one woman said at a charity event, her smile thin and insincere. "A cleaner marrying into the Walker family. It sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it?" Sarah smiled politely, refusing to rise to the bait. Fairy tales often have more truth than we realize. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Michael found Sarah in the garden, her face drawn with fatigue. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside her. "Rough day?" "You could say that," Sarah replied, her voice tired. "I don't think I'll ever fit into your world." Michael took her hand, his touch gentle. "You belong here, Sarah. Don't let them make you feel otherwise." As the weeks passed, Michael found himself increasingly drawn to Sarah. Her resilience, kindness, and unwavering support began to break through his carefully constructed walls. He admired how she faced every challenge with grace, her strength becoming a source of inspiration for him. However, their growing bond was soon tested by an unexpected threat. During a critical business negotiation, a competitor, Robert Harris, decided to exploit Sarah's past to undermine Michael. "Michael," Robert said with a smug smile, "I couldn't help but hear some interesting stories about your wife. It seems her family has quite a colorful history." Michael's eyes narrowed. "What are you getting at, Robert?" "Oh, nothing," Robert replied, feigning innocence. "Just that it's interesting how quickly secrets come to light." The insinuation was clear. Sarah's family had struggled with financial difficulties, and her father had been involved in a minor scandal years ago. Though resolved, it was enough to cause a stir. The next day, tabloids splashed headlines about the scandalous past of Michael Walker's wife. The article painted Sarah in an unflattering light, casting doubts on her character and intentions. "Michael, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, tears in her eyes as she read the article. "I never wanted to bring this kind of trouble to you." Michael wrapped his arms around her, his voice firm. "This isn't your fault, Sarah. Harris is trying to use you to get to me. We'll handle this together." Despite the media frenzy, Michael's support for Sarah never wavered. He addressed the board, reaffirming his commitment to his wife and condemning the smear campaign. "Sarah's past is irrelevant to her character and our marriage," he declared. "Anyone who has a problem with that can deal with me." The tension in the conference room was palpable as Michael faced his board of directors. The stakes were high, with a major business deal hanging in the balance. Across the table, Robert Harris smirked, sensing an opportunity to undermine Michael further. "This partnership with global tech is crucial," one board member said, looking pointedly at Michael. "But there are concerns about the recent negative press involving your wife." Michael took a deep breath, his jaw set. "Sarah's past has no bearing on this deal. We should be focusing on the benefits of this partnership, not personal matters." Harris leaned forward, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Public perception matters, Michael. If we appear vulnerable, it could affect our market position." Michael's eyes flashed with determination. "I stand by my wife. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to proceed. The tension was broken by a knock on the door. Sarah entered, her presence calm and composed. "Excuse me," she said, meeting everyone's gaze. "I have a proposal that might address these concerns." The room fell silent as Sarah walked to the head of the table, a stack of documents in her hands. "I've been reviewing the terms of the global tech deal. There are a few points that could be leveraged to our advantage." Henry, who had been silently observing, raised an eyebrow. "Go on, Sarah." Sarah outlined her ideas, highlighting strategic adjustments and potential benefits that had been overlooked. Her insights were sharp, her analysis thorough. As she spoke, the skepticism in the room began to fade, replaced by genuine interest. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, one of the senior board members nodded. "These are excellent points. We hadn't considered these angles." Harris's smug expression faltered, but he quickly recovered. "This doesn't change the public perception issue." "Public perception can be managed," Sarah countered. "What matters is the strength of our position. And with these adjustments, we can secure the deal and mitigate any fallout." Henry looked at his son, then back at Sarah, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Sarah. Your proposal is impressive." Michael stood, his voice firm. "I think it's clear that Sarah's contributions are valuable. I suggest we move forward with her recommendations." The board agreed, and the tension in the room eased. As the meeting adjourned, Henry approached Michael and Sarah, a mixture of pride and uncertainty in his eyes. "Michael, may I speak with you privately?" Henry asked. Michael nodded, and they stepped into Henry's office. Henry closed the door, turning to face his son. "I underestimated Sarah. Her insights were remarkable." Michael nodded. "She's intelligent and capable, more than most people give her credit for." Henry sighed, his stern facade cracking. "I've been hard on you, Michael. On both of you. This arrangement was meant to teach you a lesson, but perhaps it's me who needed to learn something." Michael looked at his father, seeing a vulnerability he had never witnessed before. "What are you saying, Dad?" "I'm saying," Henry began, his voice softer, "that I see now how much Sarah means to you, and how much she brings to our lives. I questioned her place here, but I was wrong." Michael felt a swell of emotion. "I love her, Dad. She's changed my life in ways I never expected." Henry nodded, a small smile forming. "Then you have my support. Fully." That evening, during a business dinner, Michael stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone for their hard work and dedication. And I especially want to acknowledge my wife, Sarah, for her invaluable contributions." Sarah looked up, surprised, but touched. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, she felt truly accepted. As the evening wore on, Michael and Sarah found a quiet moment on the balcony. The city lights sparkled below, a testament to their journey together. "Thank you for standing up for me," Sarah said softly. Michael took her hand, his eyes filled with love. "Thank you for showing me what really matters." Despite the recent triumphs, she felt the weight of every skeptical glance and snide remark. One evening, after a particularly harsh comment from a guest, Sarah retreated to the solitude of the garden, tears stinging her eyes. Michael found her there, the moonlight casting a soft glow on her face. "Sarah," he called gently, approaching her. "What's wrong?" Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. "It's just everything. The pressure, the judgment. I don't know if I can keep doing this." Michael's heart ached at the sight of her distress. "Sarah, I had no idea it was affecting you this much. Please, talk to me." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I feel like an outsider here, Michael. No matter what I do, I can't seem to fit in." And it's not just the guests. Even some of the staff look at me like I don't belong. Michael reached out, taking her hands in his. You do belong, Sarah, more than anyone. You've changed my life, and I can't imagine it without you. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. Michael, I don't know if I can stay. The constant scrutiny. It's too much. Michael's grip tightened on her hands, desperation in his voice. Please, Sarah, don't leave. I love you. I need you by my side. We'll face this together, I promise. Sarah's resolve wavered, the depth of Michael's feelings touching her heart. Do you really mean that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. With all my heart, Michael said, his eyes earnest. I'll do whatever it takes to make this work. Just as Sarah was about to respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from sadness to alarm. It's the hospital. It's about my mother. Michael's concern deepened. What happened? Sarah answered the call, her face paling as she listened. My mother. She's taken a turn for the worse. I need to go to her. Michael didn't hesitate. I'll come with you. No, Sarah said firmly, though her voice was strained. I need to do this alone. She needs me, and I have to be there for her. Michael nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I understand, but know that I'm here for you no matter what. Sarah packed quickly, her heart heavy with worry. As she prepared to leave, Michael held her close. Take care of your mother, Sarah, and come back to me when you can. I'll be waiting. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she kissed him goodbye. Thank you, Michael, for everything. At the hospital, Sarah found her mother weak but conscious. Mom, I'm here, she said, holding her hand. Her mother smiled faintly. Sarah, my darling, I'm so glad you're here. For the next few days, Sarah devoted herself to her mother's care, the bond between them providing strength. Despite the exhaustion, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Back at the mansion, Michael struggled with the emptiness left by Sarah's absence. He threw himself into his work, but his thoughts constantly drifted to her. He realized that her presence had become the anchor in his life, and he was determined to make things right. One evening, as Michael sat in his studio, lost in his thoughts, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. Mum is stable now. I'll be home soon. Relief washed over him, and he replied immediately. Take your time. I'll be here. A week later, Sarah returned to the mansion, greeted by Michael's warm embrace. I missed you, he whispered, holding her tight. I missed you too, Sarah replied, her voice full of emotion. In the quiet of the evening, they sat together, the bond between them stronger than ever. The turning point had come, and with it, a new understanding of their shared journey. Michael stood in his office, gazing out over the city skyline. The recent weeks had been a whirlwind of change, but with Sarah's return, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to implement the values Sarah had taught him into his business practices, focusing on integrity and social responsibility. The first step was a company-wide meeting. As the employees gathered, Michael took the stage, his voice steady and confident. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Walker Industries. We are implementing policies that prioritize ethical practices and community engagement. This isn't just about business, it's about doing what's right. The staff exchanged curious glances, but there was a noticeable shift in the room. Michael's sincerity was palpable, and his leadership began to inspire a collective sense of purpose. Back at the mansion, Sarah and Henry found themselves spending more time together. Henry, once aloof and imposing, had started to soften. One evening they sat in the library, the crackling fireplace casting a warm glow. "Sarah," Henry began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you and the impact you would have on my son and our family." Sarah looked up, surprised by his candor. "Thank you, Henry. That means a lot." Henry sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You know, when I built this company, I was driven by the fear of failure. My own father was a harsh man, never satisfied with anything I did. I swore I would prove him wrong, but in doing so, I became just like him." Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for the man who had always seemed so unyielding. "It's never too late to change, Henry. You've already taken the first step by recognizing it." Henry nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Your influence on Michael has been profound. He's become the man I always hoped he would be. And that's thanks to you." As the weeks passed, Michael and Sarah faced numerous challenges together. Implementing new policies wasn't easy, and there were many who resisted the changes. One afternoon, Michael returned home, visibly frustrated. "Long day?" Sarah asked, meeting him at the door. "You could say that," Michael replied, sighing. "Not everyone is on board with the new direction. It's like trying to turn a ship in a storm." Sarah placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Change is never easy, but you're doing the right thing. And I'm here with you, every step of the way." One evening, as they sat in the garden, Michael turned to Sarah, his expression serious. "You know, I don't think I would have had the courage to make these changes without you." Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the love she felt for him. "You've always had the courage, Michael. You just needed to believe in yourself." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Henry approached, looking more relaxed than usual. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course not," Michael said, moving over to make room. As they sat together, Henry began to speak, his voice filled with vulnerability. "I haven't been the best father or leader. I've made mistakes and I've hurt people I care about. But I want to do better. For both of you." Sarah reached out, taking his hand. "We all make mistakes, Henry. What matters is what we do next." Henry smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." In that moment, the three of them sat in companionable silence, united by a shared commitment to growth and transformation. The mansion, once a symbol of rigid tradition, now felt like a place of hope and renewal. The grand ballroom of the conference center buzzed with anticipation. This was Michael's moment. He stood at the podium, the spotlight casting a warm glow on his determined face. Executives and investors filled the room, waiting to hear his proposal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice steady, "today I'm proud to present a new direction for Walker Industries, one that not only promises growth, but also embraces our responsibility to the community." He detailed the innovative strategies and ethical practices that he and Sarah had developed together. The room fell silent, captivated by his vision. When he finished, there was a moment of stillness before the applause erupted. Henry, standing at the back of the room, felt a swell of pride. As the crowd dispersed, he approached Michael, a broad smile on his face. "You did it, son. You've made me prouder than I ever thought possible." Michael smiled, his eyes scanning the room for Sarah. "Thank you, Dad. But I couldn't have done it without Sarah." Henry nodded, turning to address the crowd. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special. Sarah Walker, whose wisdom and insight have been instrumental in shaping this new vision." Sarah, standing near the stage, blushed as the audience turned to her, their applause a testament to her growing respect and admiration within the community. She smiled, feeling truly accepted for the first time. Later that evening, back at the mansion, a sense of celebration filled the air. Michael and Sarah hosted a family gathering, the house alive with laughter and joy. As the guests mingled, Michael and Sarah found a quiet moment on the balcony. "I can't believe how far we've come," Sarah said, leaning against Michael. Michael wrapped an arm around her, looking out at the twinkling city lights. "And we're just getting started." The night continued peacefully, the family gathering a symbol of their strengthened bonds. As the last guests left, Michael and Sarah sat together in the garden, the quiet of the evening wrapping around them. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Sarah asked, resting her head on Michael's shoulder. "Every day," Michael replied, his voice filled with warmth. "And whatever comes, we'll face it together." The next morning, as Sarah sorted through the mail, she found an anonymous letter addressed to her. She opened it, her eyes widening in surprise as she read the contents. "Michael, look at this," she said, handing him the letter. Michael read it, his eyebrows raising in astonishment. A hidden inheritance. This could change everything. Sarah nodded, excitement and curiosity mingling in her gaze. "It's a chance for a new adventure." Michael smiled, taking her hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together."